30. Everything was different. There were clouds, but a soft light covered the streets. Rodin let his gaze fall where it would, walking a circuitous route to Effie's father. The building where he'd removed the fat man slightly out of his way had a blue tinge to the brickwork he'd not noticed before. He walked round the back, spotting the escape route he'd planned, the pile of rubbish that would have broken his fall had he needed it. He wouldn't miss the escapes. Only a few days ago, the thought of jumping from that window 2 stories up and trusting a pile that others had thrown out would have been nothing to him. But now, as he looked at the bags bursting with rotten food and buckled tins, he found it hard to imagine landing on it. In his mind he felt the impact, the sharp spikes of pain. No knowing what was hiding in the plastic. He didn't need that anymore. He was free. And he smiled as he carried on his way. A lone figure smiling to himself. One of the unwritten rules of the street: never trust someone smiling on their own. That made him smile even more. Maybe he should simply go crazy, wandering the streets all day. He could still take care of himself, and it wouldn't take long for word to get around that he wasn't to be messed with. He could go where he wanted, do what he wanted. Just another nut on the streets, watched warily by everyone else. Part of the local color. But not round here. Too much baggage. Too much of his old life. He thought of elsewhere. Maybe, when this was over, he would follow that train tunnel past the edge and keep going. He could take everything he needed to survive. How long? 1 week? 2. The next stop on the train, the next dome, was a couple of 100 miles. He could walk that in a week, less at a forced march. Or he should take it slower and enjoy the scenery. He laughed out loud once more, already the crazy, as he thought how retirement was supposed to be spent at a more relaxed pace. Of course, many could not afford the luxury of retirement. Food and water, somewhere to sleep, nothing came cheap. Unless they had someone to care for them, many were forced to continue working. Very few had the funds Rodin now possessed. And many never reached an age when they would even consider retiring. Rodin had seen to that for some. Countless targets removed before their time. At least they didn't have to worry about their old age. His usual line: everyone had to die sometime. But now, it didn't seem as light as he'd always made it. Everyone died, but their time was not prearranged. And the length of life was not as important as what they did with their time. He thought of Ratch. At heart, the man was good. Ratch cared for those who worked for him. He also cared for his friends, as he had shown with Sharoff. He deserved to retire in comfort someday, a handful of his girls caring for him. It almost hadn't happened. Still might not. It depended on what happened now. Rodin was at the old man's building. He took the steps up to the door and pressed the screen. Effie's father answered. Rodin said who it was. There was a click and the door unlatched. Rodin opened it and entered, taking a quick glance along the street as he did so. Old habit. Rodin raced up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. The burst of energy felt good, and his heart pumped faster when he reached the old man's door. He rapped sharply, stepping back. He noted the eye over the door, and realized he was standing with knees bent, ready to move. The old man opened the door, and Rodin was struck by how frail he looked. His face was gaunt, his thinning hair hanging limply over his ears. He wore a stained shirt and creased trousers that looked like he'd slept in them. There was the smell of old age and death, body fluids and musty heat.
Is it done?
His voice was almost a croak. Can I come in? The figure shuffled to one side, letting Rodin enter. There was another smell, and Rodin realized what it was when he entered the main room. Take-out food cartons littered the table. Burgers, pizzas, unspecified containers with remains of semi-solids sitting in them. Fats and spices rising like a miasma. The old man slumped into a hard chair, one arm resting on the table close to a spill of something that looked green. Rodin wanted to point it out to him, to get a cloth and wipe it up.
Is he gone? Did you get rid of the fucker?
The last word was spat out, his face contorted in hatred. For a moment Rodin misunderstood. He thought the old man was talking about malice. No love lost between them, and as much as the son was using the father, so was the father using the son. But he saw the state of the man, the state of the room. He was not thinking clearly enough for that. No, this was still about the piece of his heart that had been ripped out. It was still about his Effie. Rodin shook his head. The old man's brow furrowed.
There was a problem. You couldn't find him. Or maybe someone else had got there first. His kind's sure to have loads of enemies. Someone else got the bastard. Never mind, I'll pay you for your time. As long as he's gone. As long as he can't harm anyone else.
He reached to one side to a low shelf, bringing out a lone envelope from behind a picture. The picture showed a young girl, smiling coyly, head to one side, hair hanging loosely as if she had been playing all day. Barely in double digits. The word cute came to Rodin's mind. He imagined she could be an handful, but with one smile she would be forgiven. And in that mischief she would be careful. She wouldn't want to hurt anyone. She was simply having fun. Enjoying herself. Being a kid. Rodin imagined her, 10 years older, using the same smile, the same expression. A cuteness that promised so much more, a little fun, a release. An escape from the drudgery of the day. A chance to grasp that carefree attitude of a happy childhood, some kind of mythical idyll that maybe happened for a few days each year. That was Effie's job, her purpose. She was bringing that back to people. Even the ones who wanted nothing but a physical release for their urges, she was giving them that freedom. Rodin envied her. He had spent a decade ending lives where she enhanced them. He had taken money to inflict pain, intense if brief, where she had been paid willingly by those she made feel better. She had touched so many lives. She had done more to make this world a better place in her own short life than Rodin could ever imagine doing. What had he done to improve this world? The scum he had removed didn't count. They'd meet their ends sooner or later. It was the others that cut him now. Those who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Those who were trying to make the best of their own lives. Those who were no threat to anyone. The fat man. The couple. The nameless thugs hired by Malice and Sporif. He knew so little of their thoughts, their own desires, their fears. He had no notion of the ripples he was setting in motion when he killed. The old man was holding out the envelope now. Rodin could see a name in spidery handwriting. The man he had been sent to remove. The last contract. The one he had not completed. Rodin shook his head, keeping his arms down. There would be no point removing him. I don't want your money. But I thought I'd let you know what I did. Or didn't do. The envelope shook.
You didn't kill him. You found him and you let him live. I offered you good money. I was assured you were the best. Malice said you could see no problems.
The old man's voice was raising, and he was shaking the envelope violently now.
After what that monster did to my daughter, after what he put her through, you decide he should be allowed to live. Is that justice? A poor innocent girl dies through no fault of her own, and the shitbag who killed her gets to live.
He didn't kill her.
He sent her out for others to use her. He was as guilty as any of them. He fucked her up just like they did.
Rodin remained calm. They didn't kill her either. And you know it. The man's whole body was shaking now, and Rodin watched spittle flying from his lips. The envelope wavered in his hand, and he stared at it before bringing his other hand up. Both hand full of tremors he tore, colored paper visible within. The money ripped in halves, then in quarters. When he could tear no more, he threw the paper at Rodin.
They killed her. And if you don't have the balls to do what I offered to pay you for, you're as guilty as they are. This world has gone to shit, and people like you are the reason why.
Rodin's old arguments flashed through his mind, but they meant nothing. A tool used by others, but he always had a choice. He was as guilty as everyone else. No. Not everyone. Some made the right choice. Some fought against the pain and misery. Effie, Ratch. Sharoff, Helia. Doing what they could to help. He looked at Effie's father. The old man was quiet after his outburst, but the anger was still there. Rodin could see it bubbling behind his eyes, behind his quivering cracked lips. You know it was a medical condition. You know none of those people knew about it. Only your daughter did. And she carried on acting as if everything was okay. If anyone was responsible, it was your daughter herself. Rodin knew this would get a strong reaction, but the ferocity was more than he expected. The remains of takeaways started flying his way, spurred on by the abuse and yells of the old man, his voice louder now, stronger. Then he was throwing cutlery, blunt knives, plastic forks and cheap chopsticks. Rodin stood impassively, working hard on not flinching. None of the things thrown his way would hurt, and neither would the words. He had been called worse. He had been assaulted with worse objects. There was no point in reacting. And when the table was empty and the greasy leftovers were running down Rodin's front, the old man slumped back, his head raised to the ceiling, his eyes shut. His mouth quivered as if in prayer. You can blame whoever you want, Rodin said, keeping his voice low and calm, but you know that will never bring her back. Whatever you do, she's gone. Going after anyone who had any contact with her is only going to waste more lives. No sounds came from the old man, but he was breathing heavily. How many is it going to take? How many more people have to suffer before you feel satisfied? And now there was a sound. It took Rodin a moment to realize it was the sound of crying. The old man's body spasmed with each sob. A tear appeared at the edge of an eye, built up and flowed over his skin, running along the creases on his cheek. And the old man was muttering. Rodin caught a few words.
How many? Bring her back.
He waited. The man brought his hands up to his face, his eyes. His mouth opened and he yelled. A strong roar, but it changed. It weakened, became choked and disappeared as a croaky cry, barely a sound at all. A question repeated.
What have I done? What have I done?
The old man let his head fall into his hands, elbows resting on his knees. The question echoed in Rodin's mind. But it was in the past. There was no way to change what had happened. Dwelling on all the lives he had taken would not bring them back. It would not make amends. Kneeling before malice, Rodin had thought the end was coming, and he had welcomed the peace it would bring. But he was a survivor. Another part of him had wanted to carry on. He was not yet old, he had a life ahead of him. Yes, he would have the guilt of what he had done with him for years, but that would only be an issue if he let it. He was tough. He had trained himself. He could cope. He was not ready for the end, but he was ready for change. A mercenary no more, he thought of Helia, of the new life inside her. Innocent and pure. And he knew she would do all she could to protect it from everything the world would throw at it. She would do all she could to let it grow up as a happy child, searching for those idyllic moments that would remain with it forever. Rodin had none of those. No. They were there somewhere. He had a childhood, he had happy memories. He needed to dig them out. Like the memories of the woman near the bunker, the brief moments of contentment and enjoyment, the bursts of life they had brought to each other, more memories would come. He had been a child. That part of his life was still closed and he had changed. He had grown and been a mercenary. Now it was time for something different. The old man had lived a long life. He had raised a beautiful daughter. He had done whatever he needed to over the years. And now he was old. He had lost everything he held dear, and Rodin suspected even the memories were going sour. They would hold no happiness, only pain, contained in thoughts of what could have been. There was nothing more for the old man. Where Rodin could walk away and start again, the old man was trapped. His body was becoming a prison. The past was greater than the future. Rodin's last question, how many more suffer before the old man is satisfied? There was no answer, because the old man would not find that satisfaction. He had lost too much. Rodin rose and took a step forward. I could offer one last service. No charge. Effie's father took his hands from his eyes and looked up. They were bloodshot, wet, unfocused. They traveled down to Rodin's hand and the lance it held. After this, no more have to suffer for your daughter. She'll be free. So will you. The old man's eyes stayed on the lance. His head bobbed once, twice, and he looked up. A smile cracked on his lips as he softly shut his eyes. Rodin stepped closer, moving to one side. The man's lips were moving, as if trying to force out a word. Rodin placed the metal against the man's neck. He felt the tip rake the skin, sliding into muscle. Under his thumb lay the indentation on the plunger. Rodin pushed. The lips moved once more.
Thank you.
Rodin moved back. He stowed his lance, stepped carefully around the cartons littering the floor, and turned once to look at the old man in the chair, arms still resting on the armrests, hand no longer clenched, eyes shut gently, a slight smile on his lips. He looked at peace. The sleep of Slinax. But he would wake, and when he did, the peace would evaporate. Rodin knew what he had to do. This was not a brutal removal. This was an act of kindness. This was where he used his skills to help. In his mind, images ran. The thugs in Joran's room, their wounds leaking as they lay in a heap. Then Sporif's thugs and Sporif himself. His head, unrecognizable, and the blood spreading, making its way to the stairs. Too much blood. The blade was already in Rodin's hand, already reaching for the old man's neck. But Rodin forced it to stop. He didn't want to see the old man's blood. He thought how others would find the room, the landlord, or a chance visitor. He imagined them coming in, seeing the mess, then seeing the slit throat. Another person killed. More violence. Another life taken in a bloody attack. Rodin sheathed the blade and looked around. He found a cushion where it had fallen to the floor, and he imagined another scene. Someone entering the room, seeing the mess, then seeing the old man slumped in a chair. Maybe the person goes over to him. They call out, give him a shake. There is no response. They see his head loll forward, and only then do they check, see if he's breathing. There is nothing. The old man, alone in his room, fading away in his favorite chair. Death catching up at the end of his life. As it should be. As Rodin held the cushion over the old man's face, he scanned the room. He considered tidying, but rejected that thought. This was how the man had lived. It was right that the mess remain. But a few things would need changing. He held the cushion in place for longer than necessary, and knew when he removed it that the old man would be at peace. He checked for breathing, hunted for a pulse, but found neither. He put the cushion back on the floor, then cleared up the remains of the envelope and the money. Money would lead to questions, and Rodin didn't want anyone to jump to conclusions. He placed the scraps in his pocket. He'd dispose of them later. Then he reached up for the picture and looked once more to the child, to the old man's daughter. Ephraim. Effie. Bubbly, full of life. So much potential. So much joy she could bring into the lives of others. She had brought joy to the old man. Despite the way things had ended, she was what he lived for. She had his heart, and she had given him the power to carry on. He placed the picture on the old man's lap, resting one hand to stop it falling. Then he stood back. It was perfect. Rodin turned and made for the door. He was smiling, even as he felt moisture at the corner of one eye. He had done something good. Thank you for your interest in this book. Rodin might have come to the end of his career as an assassin, but his story is far from over. As he heads away from the dome and the districts, his unremembered past threatens to destroy his future. Deepwater, the third Dominions novel, is available to read now. If you'd like a couple of free, exclusive Dominions novellas, both tales from Rodin's past as a mercenary, then sign up to the mailing list. For details of this, along with other books and short stories, visit twiain.com. And if you have a moment, please leave a rating and review.